It's thanks for joining us. I'm very excited to kind of tap into your knowledge here and show the viewers just how good you are.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So do you want to start off, Tony, that if anyone's joining us, that if they don't know much about you and maybe a little bit of background and how you came to be at Melbourne University as a head coach there?
Yeah, so obviously you'll pick up from the accent that I'm English.
Yep.
I moved to Australia in 2014. So I was working in England, worked at a university previously, and there we ran a program I had a dual role. So I worked for the English Institute of Sport and they bought time off of the university, and I was also head of performance there. We ran a business where we had associations with Arsenal Ladies, the Lawn Tennis Association, England Golf, County Golf and stuff like that. So we had a good rapport of about 150 athletes that were coming through our doors of coaches working. And yeah, it was a real time for me to sort of blend my career in terms of what I do. Previous to that, I was a personal trainer and I'd done that for 6 years, really loved it. And I suppose I had an opportunity to move to Saudi Arabia, and I did that for about a year and a half. And when I came back, I decided that, now's the time to decide what I want to do long term. And that was to be a strength coach. That's why I'd studied at university. So I did that at Hertfordshire University. And then my wife is Australian. We decided to move to Australia to bring up our family here in the beautiful country and all the sun and stuff. So I didn't originally get straight into strength conditioning in Australia. I did another job previous to that. And then the University of Melbourne job came available and I applied. And it was on a part-time basis to start, but I took the punt that it would turn into potentially something full-time. And I've been there now for just over 4 years.
Fantastic. Excellent. You've traveled a long way.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's a really interesting journey that I've been on. A lot of investigation into myself about what I really want to do. And sometimes you can get caught up in the process and have too much fun doing what you're doing, and then realizing that there's skills or stuff or there's interest that you want to do, and you just got to make sure that you act upon them before it passes you by with your opportunities. I'd say it's never too late, but it's definitely, I'm now at a stage where I'm a lot older, so I'm probably not going to get that the job for those younger roles for people that are coming up and through. But I think more as a managerial type role might be my next move after the current role I'm doing.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. So, just tying into that, Tony, obviously you're enjoying what you're doing and you're great at it and you work with a lot of athletes around the university. So I guess your philosophies, what would be some of your methods or your philosophies in the way you go about training clients?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's one that I've sort of, over the years, sort of developed, and I've sort of tried to spend time around good people, good coaches, people that I respect within the industry, and try and have little moments with them, either at a conference or just over the phone or just replying to an email or stuff like that. Just trying to work out what other people's beliefs are. And then from that, you then shape your own with your own experiences and understanding. We talked about this before previously, and you sort of asked for what are your three main ones for your philosophy. And I suppose if I was looking at one thing that I really believe in, and that is that not to load a faulty movement pattern. So I'm very much a coach that wants my athletes to move well. I don't get caught up too much about who's got the biggest squat or the deadlift or who's the most powerful or anything like that. I think my programming philosophy is very individualized. It's about the movement of the athlete and the athlete's movement then into the sport that they play. But I want you to move well first before I even try to be specific or anything else. So there's some fundamental movements around a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull, a brace. They're all in the programs of everything that I wrote. I don't write upper body splits and lower body splits because for me as a coach that works with athletes across a multitude of sports, I don't believe that that's relevant for athletes that are trying to improve themselves in their sport. I think if you're a bodybuilder, that's where the background comes from body splits. And I'm not sure if you're functioning around, say, being a rugby player or something like that, that if you do a heavy legs day the day before and you then have to go and do a rugby training session, is that going to affect your ability to sprint or to scrum and stuff like that? So that body split doesn't really makes sense for me when I'm working with athletes. And I've had many a discussion with athletes, because I get athletes that come through that have had programs written by other people, and that is the philosophy that's come through. And there's always a little bit of a healthy discussion around what's the correct way forward. So I suppose movement patterns is my big one. I think when we're in the training environment, a philosophy would be that I put a lot of emphasis on consistency. That consistency within the movement pattern, consistency with the training program. I believe that you should follow the program the way it was written. And, you know, not just because you may see someone else doing a really cool exercise, you suddenly think that that's something you can add into your program. I do like that relationship between the athlete to decide that if this is the program we're going to follow, for us to work out the adaptations that are at the end of it, we need to follow the program. If you start missing sessions and stuff, and that's okay, you can miss sessions and stuff, but it does affect the adaptations of the outcome. So if we predict how successful a program is, or how we're going to make you better, we have to follow the program the way it was written. And I'm just looking for my third one. So the other one would be strong enough, which is a really interesting concept for a strength coach, because I believe I'm a strength conditioning coach, and I spend a lot more time probably in the conditioning side of my title, I suppose. I think you can get to a certain point, and it's really hard to know where that point of strong enough is, but there is definitely diminishing returns for trying to get that extra additional strength. That sometimes my belief is that if you try to chase after it too much, it just takes you longer to recover from the session. And when you're doing a sport that's just not gym training, if you're powerlifting, 100%, that's what we're looking at. But if you've got to go and do two, three training sessions a week, you might do some skills training and stuff. Time is really important, that you try and make it as concise as possible to get the maximum amount of adaptation with not affecting your ability to recover. And when you're doing a multitude of, like some of athletes I've got are doing 14 to 18 sessions a week, that belief of strong enough is very a belief that I have, that we have to keep them true to that. And you know, athletes love to lift heavy. They love to get really strong. They like to have the big numbers, but I'm not sure it necessarily always makes them a better athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's you summed that up really well. The program has to be specific to the sport, the athlete, and we'll get a little bit into the maturity of the athlete and how you kind of vary that depending on the level of athlete and whether they're in season, off season, these kind of things. But just before we get to the real meat of it, so you know, you've obviously been around a lot of coaches in the past, and you've had mentors and people work under you. What would you say would be some red flags that you see with strength and conditioning coaches? You did touch a little bit on you know, programming, you know, a little bit. They don't program necessarily correctly for sport, but what are some other common red flags you see, and how do you think? How do you, if you had to hire a coach under you, what things would you look for in that coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suppose we have to look at an industry-wide in terms of strength conditioning, especially here in Australia. There's very few jobs that people are going for. People aren't moving on. So there tends to be a real backlog in terms of junior coaches that aren't getting opportunities to actually really break into the field. So something that's really big in Australia and in the UK is to do apprenticeships or internships and stuff. And probably a red flag, I would say, for any up-and-coming strength conditioning coaches, the theory of not spreading yourself too thin. Some of them, like, will get an opportunity. Invariably in Melbourne, it will be an AFL club of some sort, whether that's at the VAFA level or right the way through to the top. And then they get like another opportunity, and then they might find that their course that they're doing in strength conditioning stuff also requires that they have to do a placement. And I think what ends up happening is they spread themselves so thin that they don't actually really take the opportunities that they've been given. And a thing that because I do take internships on, but I actually want them to spend maybe no longer than 6 months with me, but actually spend a bit more time. So then I can invest, they can ask the questions, they can start possibly training athletes and doing the warm-ups or guiding them through exercises and all of that sort of alike. And then they get what I call getting your hands dirty. It's really hard within the apprenticeship, internship type thing to actually get anything more than just watching somebody else work. And I don't think you learn the trade enough. So I think one of the red flags I would flag up is A, try and do less internships at the same time. So maybe do one. Really try and get the person that is your lead on that to take on the mentorship role to plug some gaps and to really share. If you come and spend some time with me, you can have everything. You can have all of my, if it's classed as best stuff, you can have it all. I don't worry too much about you then copying and stuff, because that's often not the best way to go forward. It's about learning what's the philosophy behind the program and working out what you then want to do with that as a coach. But I also think experience of working with athletes, and I don't care whether it's a 6-year-old. I think when I was working with some of the coaches in tennis and stuff, I used to love watching a high performance coach working with a load of 6-year-old kids that are going through their drills, and then in the very next hour they might be training Britain's best under 18 tennis player. And it's that transition between those two environments. But I think if you're not in your internship actually getting coaching experience, then go and train the young kids, because if you can control a group of young 10-year-old kids running around doing everything, you can coach elite athletes. That's the easy bit. The 10-year-olds are the hard bit.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that.
Like
I believe the same. Yeah, absolutely. When you have someone that can do everything, it becomes easier, doesn't it? It makes you look better as a coach, and they're strong, they're fast, everything. So I think it's good to delve in the clients that are not up to that level as well, because it teaches us coaches a little bit better about how much knowledge we have and how we can kind of expose that knowledge on the people to understand. But no, that's really good points you made, Tony. And so let's say a client comes to you, and let's say for the purpose they're an untrained athlete or they're a recreational athlete, and say, Tony, okay, I'm a tennis player, and I want to become faster, I want to move better on the court. Is there some I guess methodology you use in terms of testing where they're at, like a baseline level?
Yeah. Well, I think there's things out there called like the FMS, which is a functional movement screen, and I've used that at previous parts in different stages of my career and stuff. I tend to have a couple of movement patterns that I like to see, and like I said, my philosophy is movement based. So anyone's potential is based on how well you move. It's really interesting. I've been fortunate enough to work with some athletes that have gone to the Olympics, so the Olympian, and some people say that makes me an Olympic coach, but I'm not quite sure about that either. And I've seen some athletes that are absolutely phenomenal in their own sport. So, we're working with like golfers that if you actually put them onto a driving range and you ask them to just explain to you the golf swing and the dynamics of it, it's like PhD knowledge. It's phenomenal about the control, the aesthetics. You then may take them into a gym, and although they're very highly ranked in their golf, you often find you take them in a gym environment, and that's not where they necessarily are really successful stuff. So there is that aspect of don't prejudge on person that comes in through your door about how good, whatever. Have a set baseline that you go through. So it will be a squat, it will be a lunge-based movement, it will be a single leg balance. I also like to look at flexibility as well and joint movement. And the one thing that you don't really have to as a coach, if you've never really coached exercise before, when it's done well, it looks right. When it's done poorly, it looks terrible. And so you can have all these measurements around the lines and the angles and stuff. And there is some real technical stuff that you can get into, but you can definitely see people that move up. Like you look at gymnastics, you look at it and go, wow, they move beautifully. So there is that sort of thing within your coaching eye that you look at when someone comes in. For a beginner, what do they need to do? It doesn't matter what sport they are. They need to move well as a human being. That's the thing. So that is squat, that squat, hinge, push, pull, press, forward roll, be able to walk, one foot in front of the other, leg balance. So it's a lot more general in their approach is how you would actually go about phasing that program together. And within that, choose the movements that produces them successfully. So I find with beginners, deadlift is actually quite a hard exercise for them to be able to control the multitude of joints and stuff. So find a different variation. If you can find movement patterns that can help them to be successful quicker, A, they will be more engaged in your program. B, they will respect your knowledge in your help get better. They will see a few quicker results because of that. And I think that's one of the major parts when working with anyone new, is that you've got to foster that relationship. Once you've got the relationship, after that, your job becomes quite easy, because there's a famous quote that says, the athletes don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I think that's one of my approaches with coaching is that I give part of my personality, part of my interest in you as an athlete, and then I want to meet that back with getting to know you, the athlete, to be able to help you to move on to the higher level.
Yeah, and that goes back to just showing, the passion you have for your teaching and the belief you have in your system. I think if that comes across, the athlete will, buy into what you're trying to do and perform better eventually.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, excellent.
I think the other thing that I've noticed probably through the career is like when you work with a beginner or a younger athlete and stuff, they're more open or need more direction around the educational side. But as we sort of move into the elite level and areas like that, I've noticed my approach is a lot more collaboration. I'm not trying to be the knowledge and the person that has all the answers. I think understanding that the athletes, especially when they're moving and they've spent quite a long time in their career, they have all of the answers that you need. You just got to ask the right questions to be able to build that program for them. And I actually see myself now, as I'm working with better quality athletes, that it's more of a collaboration approach rather than me being the dictator coach or me coming up with the answers to what is the best exercise. It's much more shared approach with the athlete, and that is the most enjoyable part of my job these days, I feel.
Fantastic. Yeah. So it's all based on the relationship you have with the athlete and that you built over time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. And now we're, in Melbourne especially, we're in the lockdown, Tony, and it's obviously we're not allowed to train anyone, but there's a lot of social media going on, a lot of workouts online, and there's fancy videos showing up. So if you had to kind of give some knowledge or professional experience of, how would people kind of manage doing workouts that they see on YouTube? Like, how do they know, what's right, what's the fancy one, or how do they kind of like immerse themselves in that, just especially during this lockdown stage? It's pretty difficult with so much going on.
I mean, I just look at content sometimes, and you just search it on the different engines that you go in, and whoosh, there goes like a long list. And to be able to pick out what the best program is out of that is like taking a needle out of a haystack. I think, it really depends on what you're trying to do. I think at this stage, we all need to be moving. We all need to be doing some exercise. And to be honest, I've not really seen any programs out there that I would consider to be dangerous. I think they are pretty much all the same. That some of them are better produced, and I really respect the people that have got better marketing skills than I have in terms of building their business. So I don't really see anything out there too dangerous. But I think it all comes around to the razzmatazz of it and stuff like that. And I think there's a difference between general public and the athletes. I think one of the things I do see in the athlete world is that they see an exercise and it looks cool or looks funky or looks sport specific. And you have to really understand that when an exercise actually gets written into a program, there's also like a philosophy for why that's in the program. So you could have one exercise that could be done in two different ways. Mm-hmm. So you have to be careful about just copying something else that you see, because it may look like it's applied, but it possibly isn't. So if I was advising, and I have my family back home in England has sort of said, what's exercise? I've created a few YouTube links on exercises and stuff like that. And it all comes down to, A, what is your equipment? What is your environment? How many times you want to train stuff? So I'd sort of recommend that, you can go to the World Health Organization, and they recommend we need to be doing somewhere around 25 to 30 minutes every day, getting out on our feet. And I'm quite lucky that I've now got a dog, and I've had a dog now for 10 months, and I end up getting out, taking the dog for a walk every day. And I just find that's my time to get my sort of walking exercise in. And then I do probably 3 workouts as well, just doing the basic squat and stuff like that. But yeah, like I said, I sometimes can get a little bit angst about people I've got 300 followers on Instagram, and there's people that have got thousands, and I look at their workouts and I think, well, I could do that. But the fact is, I'm not doing it. They are doing it, and they're doing very well out of it and stuff. So all good to that. I think just keep moving is and just following your way. But if there was a way of picking out who's good to listen, my sort of criteria comes more from strength coaches who are writing good programs for athletes or working with good athletes. That's the sort of information that I'm trying to follow. So that would be Eric Cressey, Alistair McCaw in tennis. I think he bridges quite a few gaps now. He doesn't just cover the tennis specific movement. He's very big on psychology and how to become a good coach as well. So they're two people that I think are really interesting to follow. And then you just have to work out, what's your flavor? What is it that you like?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So I hope you guys got that. Cressey and McCaw, very famous strength and conditioning coaches out there. Excellent. So we have a question from Isaac, but Isaac, maybe we'll hold off a little bit on that one, but just stay with us. So, we are in lockdown. We can do a lot. I think, like you said, any movement is better than not doing anything. Being sedentary is really bad for the body. You get stiff and you won't be ready to come back when it's time to come back. So kind of moving on a little bit from there, Tony. So how do you, I guess, use communication and language for your benefit when you're trying to work with a client? I know, like, when you can be hands-on, it's a lot easier. You can kind of demonstrate the movements. You can see what they're doing wrong. You can set their body in motion. But how do you use language or communication to your advantage, especially when you're coaching, say, a female athlete versus a male, or untrained athlete versus a trained athlete? Can you kind of delve into that a little bit?
Yeah. It's something that, probably over the last few years, it's been more topical within the research side about the way that we use language. And it's something that I've actually caught myself and going, oh my God, I've read this article that says that you should stop trying to give too many cue points that don't give them a reference point. So an example like that is like bracing the core. I mean, what does that actually mean? It doesn't actually give, if you're a beginner and someone says brace your core, it's like, that mean? And I use things like flaring the ribs to athletes, which just means where they just become slightly disconnected. But that comes with a demonstration. It comes with spending time with the athlete and showing them the movement pattern of when they are flaring their ribs and when they're not. They know the difference between yes and no when it's correct. And then that becomes a coaching point all the way through. So I think quantifying your cue points is really important. And I think the other thing that a lot of coaches are talking about is to try and give it an expression, like scratching the floor with your foot when you're doing some of the sprint mechanics. So scratching your foot is a lot easier to do rather than talking about dorsiflecting the ankle, make sure that the knee's nice and high, push it down, trying to get it underneath your hips. We can actually slow our athletes down by giving them 2 points. And for any athletes that have worked with me sometimes know that I do like to talk. I probably sometimes give too much information, and I'm trying to simplify my training by giving more cue points that are just a little bit more acute, that are just not giving them too much information. I think I've been fortunate enough. I've probably trained more female athletes than I have male. And I think the dynamic of working with a female athlete, in my experience, and I can only talk from my experience, I've absolutely loved the determination, the fact that they listen a little bit more. They don't come with sometimes don't come with a preset of that they're going to challenge you in terms of knowing more than you. And I think they're easier to coach because they tend to listen. Maybe that's a male-female thing, I don't know. So with your language with female, I think when you're talking, I think sarcasm sometimes can be missed, and you can, again, it all comes down to relationship. I mean, I cannot take my personality out of my training. I like to have fun. I will be sarcastic. It comes from my English background. I love Monty Python. So I think that's where my sort of warped sense of humor comes from and stuff. And I like to have fun. I also like to get down and get into the weeds and really work hard. So one of the things that I worked with England Golf when I was working with them is they had this thing called the light switch effect, which is when you do your training, when you get under a car or you're doing an exercise, you basically have to do your routine, go through your routine, play your golf shot. Then you need to switch the light switch off and just relax. Maybe have a conversation with your caddy, walk the 230 odd yards that you have to walk to get to your ball, and then switch the light switch on. Because if you try and play around a golf for 4 hours with your attention switched on all the time, you will burn out on a round. You won't be able to win the tournament because you just get too much mental fatigue. And in the gym environment, I try to create that as well, that when there's a time to lift, you concentrate, you focus, you get really intense in what you're doing, become really bodily aware, finish the set, switch the light switch, you can have fun, you can go and talk, you can pick up your iPhone. I know some gyms really don't like athletes to look like they're not interested in stuff, and I don't care what you do outside of the set. When you're in the set, that's when I want to know that you're interested. So I think when setting up your training environment, those are the things, and the way that you communicate that is you have to explain exactly what the outcomes are and what you want to do.
Fantastic. I'm glad you touched on that point, Tony, because us as tennis coaches, you know, we always want clients to be focused and, you know, attentive and this and that. But there is a lot of research, you know, even the top players, they're not always focused. They have to, you know, it's called a, you know, quiet mind. They have to quiet the mind, especially in between points. So, you know, they're not always thinking about, you know, where am I going to serve this ball? And, you know, is it 15-30? What's the score? The stats? They're really not doing that. They switch on very well, like you said, but they have to quiet the mind in between the reps or the sets, and in tennis, the break that they have. And, you know, it's not a joke playing tennis for 3-4 hours, and, you know, it is mentally very challenging, but I think that's a great point you mentioned.
Yeah, some of those Wimbledon matches, you know, they're like, sometimes they go on for 5 hours and stuff. And the difference between being match fit for 3.5 hours compared to a 5.5 hours match, I mean, I think it was Nadal and Federer at Wimbledon that went on for like 5.5. Just phenomenal how the high quality, he's running down, but the quality of tennis was still there. And I suppose that's why they train so hard.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And we have another question from Noah. Maybe we'll touch on this now. He says, do you have any tips and tricks between switching focus on and off?
Yeah, having the conversation about it and making someone aware. I think when I'm training with someone who's maybe doing a squat, having that little moment of feedback to where they're at. And I think it all depends on if you're noticing someone's concentration levels. A question that you might ask is, okay, so how did that feel? How could you do that better? And then make them come up with the answers, so that your coaching is not always about you providing the individual with an answer to what you're seeing, but it might be that you observe they're not doing it quite correct. Now, I have this thing, and I had a conversation with an athlete just a couple of days ago when we were doing a Zoom workout, in the moments where I see an athlete that I know has perfect technique in this movement pattern, and then I see them train and the movement pattern isn't to what I know they can do. It's about making them aware of that and then letting them actually work it out for themselves. If they're a high level athlete, they can get really good at that and they can switch it on in a moment. Beginners maybe struggle and don't find that, because of the difference between having that inset movement pattern really executed and working for you, so you know exactly what you're doing. So there is knowledge within the movement. In that sense, it's almost like maybe a clapping of the hands, maybe like, okay, switch it on. There might be that you use that exact example of, okay, this is the light switch, let's switch it on. Let's now get your attention into how you're going to be moving. So it is a language-based stuff, and you can, even if you've got a room with 15 athletes in the room, you can actually see in the distance, you see someone going up the bar, you may actually say to them, okay, no, get under the bar, switch it on. And they know that you've had that conversation about what that actually means to lift well. And there's no doubt about it, that actually does share across their own sport and how they actually, how they perform in their own individual sports when they go, about mental preparation and all of that sort of stuff as well, which is really interesting to talk with your athletes with. We have an environment where we have many athletes from different backgrounds, and I absolutely love just being aware that there might be 3 athletes talking about mental preparation for their sport and sharing that information. And it's just great to hear that the environment we have at Melbourne University isn't about Tony Sephton, the coach, making everybody better. It's definitely peer-to-peer, making themselves better as well, and sharing their examples and actually making each other better athletes. And that, for me, is the beauty of what we have at Melbourne University.
Absolutely, that culture is really important, isn't it? That team environment. And Noam, another thing we do with tennis coaches, I do with my clients on the court, is that to switch your focus off is to focus on materialistic things. So on the tennis court, we count the number of strings we have in our racket in between points. So we count the number of times we breathe, or we, smell the fresh air, or we, look to the tree next to us and see if we can spot a bird. We totally disconnect from the game. But then when we bring the attention back to the game, we try to think of the pattern we're going to use to play the point. So
that's a good point. I remember another strategy that I use, I haven't used it for a very long time, is that I used to teach people to juggle. And one of the things that we used to do, where if we really felt that people had this attention and they'd been too highly strung within their workout, is one of the things we know about when you're juggling with 3 balls is you can't think about anything else.
No.
Yeah, so just to get that distraction, sometimes we used to have a process where we're doing exercise, do some juggling, let the mind just free itself of all the coaching points they might be doing, and then switch it back on, get into the exercise, and then go.
Fantastic. Yeah. Anything, because the brain can only think about one thing at a time. It's science. So if you're thinking about juggling, you surely cannot be thinking about squatting or pressing or something like that. Yeah, that's really good advice. Hopefully that helped Noam. By the way, guys, Noam is one of the best athletes in the world at what he does. And is Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, is it
Judo.
Judo. Yeah. So thanks for joining us, Noam. Excellent athlete, and it's nice to catch you at uni one of these days when we're back. But good, Tony. So if you had to pick, I know this is a tough question. If you had to pick, and now this is across the board, but let's tailor it a little bit more to the beginner or intermediate athlete, what would be the most important physical factor that you think would have to be there? Because there's a lot of research out there that says that strength is the number one thing. You cannot be an athlete if you're not strong, and is that the truth? Is that what your experience tells you, or is it balance? Is it mentality? Is it endurance, speed? I guess it depends on the sport, but
yes, good question.
I'd like to take a stab at that.
Yeah, look, what we know, if again we're looking at performance, so if we're looking about achieving the best you can, there's like a whole different spectrum of different things that you might need to tailor on, that's just more than just strength. If we're looking at prevention of injury, strength is the single most important thing. So if you're a junior athlete and you want to go to the highest level, you need strength to decrease your chances of getting injured, but also to set the emphasis to then be able to do the more advanced stuff that might be that performance edge in what you're doing. So I think strength training and conditioning, as its definition, needs to be started earlier, and that might be just body weight squats and stuff. We can do that with young athletes, and I know we've talked a little bit about the long-term athlete development plan away from this in our previous chat that we had. But I do think that we can't wait too long. If you looked about when peak height velocity kicked in with female athletes, it might be 11, 12, and 13. For male, it might be 13, 14, and 15. So if we are setting our athletes up for future success, then underlying strength is important, but it's not lifting heavy weight. For me, it's about balance strength. It's about coordination. It's one of the real high important things I hold a lot of value for young children, especially my own. I've got 2 boys, and I haven't certainly got it right yet with them in terms of their coordination, but it's something that we practice. When we play, we practice our drills that might be around coordination based. I get them to stand on one leg, and you notice straight away that young people just want to stand with that stiff leg, and as soon as you get them to quarter squat in, it's like becomes the world's most difficult exercise. So I think the journey of where we need to go is, as a young person, I would like them to be strong, mobile, flexible, and have body awareness. How we teach them, there's a multitude of exercises.
Yes.
When we start then progressing on, the strength that we need to lift in one single exercise, possibly not that important, but having strength to be able to brace, to be able to produce force, reduce force, those are really important. Jumping mechanisms, landing. So I suppose I haven't answered your question whatsoever. I've really talked in and around it and stuff. So strength, for me, is only one part of it. One thing I do know as we get older, and I've experienced this as myself, I've bulged the disc. What I found is mobility and stretching gets worse as we get older. when you're young, it's easy to build mobility and flexibility and be able to have that for the rest of your career. If you wait until your 20s, when you've suddenly become more of a high performance athlete and you're trying to get more range of motion or flexibility or mobility, it will take you twice as long as what it would have done if you'd have started it earlier, say from the ages of 13, 14 and 15, when you're going through that peak height velocity. So one of the things we do know is that when you do go through this increase in terms of your growth, all the benefits you may have had before then can be lost through that growth. So muscles become tighter, bones become longer. So we have to work quite hard in that phase. So we need to be observing of when our children suddenly grow 2 inches or 3 inches, mobility and flexibility become really important, and their coordination may suffer as well. So they're the things that I really understand in terms of going from young to beginner. When you get to the top level, yes, it's application of force. Strength, you can't get the application of force if the strength isn't there. But I actually think they're very trainable.
Yeah.
So they're quite easy to train within a phase, to train the strength and the power and the coordination side of stuff within a lift to be strong. But if you've got somebody that can't sprint and you're trying to teach them coordination of sprinting drills, it's a lot harder when they're older than what it would be if we did it when they were younger.
Absolutely. And we see that, in the sports performance and, how players that pick up sports at a later age, it's, it's not only the technical difficulties they have, but it's the movement, trying to learn those patterns and specific movements for a sport is, I think personally that's more important than the technical aspect. And, I think now in lockdown, I think it's the perfect time to work on the athletic ability and our performance, when we can't go on the court or on the field or, play our sport that we like to do.
We actually do Zoom classes, and there's always some form of squat, lunge or some exercise. But what we did the other day is part of our warm-up classes was to put a pillow on top of our head, and you had to sit down onto the floor, place your bottom onto the floor, and then stand back up again. And we sometimes think that, we can't do some sort of real fun, sort of different types of exercise that maybe you would do with children. You give it to elite athletes, they love it. They love all that stuff. So there is no set of exercises that are deemed for those people in performance and those that are working in the young. You can have a whole group of people practicing sitting on the floor with a pillow on their head. And, if you then put the constraints of not allowed to use your hands and you have to get your bottom to touch the floor and you have to go for and spin around and stuff. There's loads of stuff that we can be doing in this time when we maybe can't get under a bar and lift some weights and stuff. That we still can get some fun. We can get some benefit, coordination, ability, and I think the question of how to build an athlete is there is only one answer for me, and it's individualized. So there is no strength then leading to power and to everything else. It's all individualized. It's all based on how they move, what their sports are, what their injury history. One of my really big beliefs that I've come across probably in the last 5 years is when somebody gets injured, they will do some exercises in their rehab that they go, oh, that one was really, I really could feel that. That one feels really good. That one I really can, seems to be the one that's making the biggest difference. In my programming, that exercise will remain, because if it counts on the belief of the athlete that it's doing good, it probably is. The movement that they're doing, like say they've got an Achilles injury and they're doing eccentric drops on a calf raise, by keeping that into the program, helps them to keep them robust in that area, helps them keep on their belief that it was an exercise that really worked for them. And you then find that you're it's almost like a safeguard of good programming. There's certain exercises that will make an athlete better, so just keep them in there. If they enjoy them as well, that's another reason. So there is you have the athlete put in the middle, and then you have all the other spectrums around them. I'm actually listening to myself and I'm going, God, you're really good at not answering the questions.
You like to talk, just like I do. I just got to listen today. Yeah.
But it is definitely individualized programs, trying to tailor it to the individual to make them better. And sometimes you'll get it wrong and it'll take a little bit longer to find what those exercises are. But strength is important, but it's not the only aspect, I wouldn't say.
The only aspect. Excellent. Good. And Tony, I don't know if you remember Isaac from our national tennis team, Isaac Watson. He's got a question that he probably once answered. So Isaac's had a bit of knee trouble on his left leg, I believe.
Yep.
He's got quad tendinopathy, and
Yep.
he's been prescribed some single leg knee extensions, just seated. So he's
Yep.
wondering, how much is that helpful, but how can he kind of progress that to add more load to that leg without kind of, damaging
Yep.
it?
So one of the things I always do whenever I get a question about someone's program and stuff like that is I would imagine he's under the guidance of a physiotherapist. And if he is, then definitely follow the guidance of the physio
Yeah.
in terms of how to do it. It's really dangerous sometimes to just think that this person really knows what they're talking about. So just taking on their ideas because, there's a question. I've never seen you move. And like I've said all the way through this, that movement's really important. Some of the things we have known that really work with tendinopathy, especially if it's patella tendon. So again, I'm not quite sure where the tendon is, but if it's patella tendon, the tendons like to be loaded. They like to be worked eccentrically because that extra load helps them to just basically rebuild their strength. So we know that doing decline squat holds isometric. So you literally, with a board that looks like this. So again, if you've got a weight plate and you can put it on top of two other plates and it creates this declined thing, you can squat on that. And because the force is pushing your body into what we call anterior, you can actually load the tendon. If it's patella tendon, you can load that. So eccentric holds, isometric work, and some decline work can really work in that environment. I'm very cautious about giving advice to someone that may be following a physio program and stuff. But again, if Isaac wants to get in contact and have some ideas about that, I'm more than happy to have a discussion after that about exactly what the injury would be. But again, when we're talking injuries, physios are your first persons that you should go to.
Yeah, hopefully that answered your question, Isaac. And Isaac's a big part of our program, so I'm sure he can reach out to you if he has more
Right.
more questions. No, excellent. And so say, Tony, let's think about some injury prevention protocols. So let's say we're doing some exercises at home and, like we're feeling like, the body's a bit sore or body hurts. How do we kind of like know how hard to push ourselves, or how do we work around injuries? I know that's a very broad question, but
this is one of my favorite topics. When it comes to injury prevention, and I'm going to talk a little bit from my own personal experience. Basically in 2017, I bulged a disc. And what I've done in that whole scope since I did that is reflect back to what was the early warning signs? Did I have any that could have helped me have made this situation different? And I had loads. I got tight in my lower back. I had groin pain for about 3 weeks, and I ignored all of it. And I'm a big preacher of that. This is what we need to do. You need to look after your aches and pains. If you need to be able to be really aware of them. And I ignored all of it, and I tried to pick up some weights in the gym, and bang, it just went. And I then had probably 6 weeks of real uncomfortable pain. Basically, where the bulge came, it was pushing onto the nerve, and until I could free up that space, no stretching, no mobility work. No, I was going to see the physio twice a week. And what I ended up doing was going to the physio. The physio would make me feel better. 2 days later, I'd stiffen up again. I'd be back in pain again. And I was completing this circle for about 4 or 5 weeks. And then what I really had to realize is I had to understand my body a bit better. And this is the message I try to give to all my athletes. Is there early warning signs for an injury? I think there is, which means we have to spend more time getting in tune with our body to know what our base level is. So if we know when we get up in the morning, we go, okay, so what we did was we did this with golf. We used to do what is the right routine for a warm-up for the golf. Well, it's not about doing hamstring stretches and doing like this routine. We used to give them 8 exercises that they all had to do. But the idea is that did they need to do them on that day? Maybe they woke up and they were already nice and loose and flexible and mobile. So what do you do when you're already in the sweet spot and then you stretch someone or mobilize them a little bit more? Do we then become less connected? So what we introduced was what we call body check, which is to swing the golf swing and go through it as their very first thing that they needed to do. And if you know anything about golfers, they would go, oh, yeah, I feel a bit tight in my left lat. So we stretch out the left lat. They then go back to the golf swing again. and they go, oh yeah, I feel a little bit stiff in my hips. So we then loosen up the hips. They then get to the swing, and what they call it is when they swing it pure. Pure means that it just feels exactly as it is. Once they've done that, then they can go and start their warm-up routines. And then they can follow a pattern that they do every single day. That then tells us that the body starts in the right place, which means anything that comes after that, we can gauge that it can be technical. But if we're tight from the day before and we go and swing our golf club, we're swinging it with a tight body. If you hit the ball left or right, you shouldn't change their technique, because it's the body that's not working, not necessarily their technique. And I know that can happen in tennis as well. That if they get really tight, they do a load of serving, they sometimes can get jammed up in the lower back. They don't rotate as well, or they don't push off the ground. Don't make technical changes until the body's right. So I think it's really important for every athlete to know when they wake up in the morning, they go, yes, my body is normal. What's my actual benchmark of where my body is? I think that will then protect you against those injuries. I've met many a football player that turned around and said, oh, don't worry, they get to the workout and say, oh, I've got really tight hands. My question to that is, what are you doing about it? And I go, well, I've just got tight hamstrings. So that will lead to injury someday down the line. So if you have any information about a movement pattern that you do that's not done well, that's got to be top of the tree in terms of what you're trying to work. And I think the better you get at that, the less injured you become. And I'm actually, I've got quite a good career based on not many of my athletes really being that injured. That's not to say I haven't worked with injured athletes, because I have, but I think I actually really enjoy the thought process around rehab and injury and recovery. And it's probably some of the most rewarding work you can do to get the athlete back to their sport. But I think the athlete have that sort of kinesthetic internal feeling that as a coach you can't even see. Yeah. So they need to be in tune, and they need to be working with that. And that for me is the best injury prevention. There's no exercises that you can do. I mean, everyone loves to talk about the glutes, and I think we've gluted everyone to death, to be honest. Like 5-minute, 10-minute circuits of just doing the glute. I guarantee your glute's going to be sore in the morning. But I was talking to a physio friend about a month ago, and we were talking in a strength test with the glute. What's the difference between a muscle that's tired and overactive in comparison to a weak glute? How would they perform in a strength test? And the answer is they probably perform the same. So how do we know whether the glutes need stretching or they need rest? Because there's two very different strategies.
Good point. Very good point. Excellent. That's you said it really well, Tony. The body is connected, right? And if there's something that there's a red flag, then we're going to take care of it. And if you don't, other muscles are going to work harder to prevent that that injury, and eventually it's going to go. Yeah, excellent. So Tony, we have a question from Ching here. Ching is one of my clients, tennis player. So he said, hi, Tony. I don't know if you can see it, but he says, hi, Tony. For adult tennis athletes in general, do you aim for certain strength benchmarks in the gym? For example, 2 times body weight deadlift, squat, or 1 times body weight bench pound clean. I think you answered that before, but Ching might not be with us. But yeah, go for it.
Yeah, look, I think the 2 times body weight deadlift, I mean, there's not that many people that can actually do that within
especially tennis players. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is literature. Literature does say that before we start doing plyometric exercise, you need to be doing 1.5 or 2 times your own body weight in squats and stuff. The reality is that not every athlete gets there and are doing plyometric work in their training program, and they're not getting injured. So you do have to follow a philosophy. I probably would say that a body weight squat is, so if you weigh 80 kilos, you need to be able to lift 80 kilos. So that's one thing I do look for. If there was something that I do with my athletes is I do want them to be able to squat their own body weight. I'd like them to be able to deadlift their own body weight. And I often find the difference between a squat and a deadlift is about 10 to 15 or to 20% difference. So you should be able to lift heavier in your deadlift compared to your squat. But once you've got up to that body weight stuff, you can then start working on some of the other aspects of training that underlying strength will be able to support. I think pull-ups is a really big exercise. I like all of my athletes to be able to complete 3 sets of 6. And if that becomes 3 sets of 10, then that tends to be the very best athletes I've ever worked with who are breaking national records or the number ones in their sport in the country. They can, male and female, can complete 3 sets of 10. Now, I don't know where that holds up in a research thing, but that's an anecdotal thing, that if you're able to support your own body weight and pull it through your upper body in a chin-up side of stuff, you've actually probably got a lot of strength in other areas as well. But if I was working with adult strength, I mean, it depends on their age, it depends on how they move, it depends on their injury, but there is no number that I actually work with that says that once you do this, you can then move on to the next stage. I don't, that doesn't work within my training philosophy, that you have to hit some certain targets to be able to do anything. If you move well and you're not getting injured, then you can move to the next level. It's all more about good quality movement.
Movement, yeah. So hopefully that answered your question, Ching. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, especially on the tennis court, we, you know, we're always moving to a ball. It's all dynamic stuff. So, you know, you might be strong in the squat, but, you know, the squat is from a starting dead position. So it's a little bit different in terms of what you might experience on the tennis court. But obviously that baseline strength that you mentioned, Tony, is quite important. You should be able to control your own body weight. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things of why the squat is so important is it's not necessarily squatting action of lifting the weight on your shoulders and going down, but it's the movement and the strength of the body. So when you decelerate, we need to use those muscles that are involved in the squat pattern. We need to create action in the body that when you squat correctly, when you can go below 90 degrees, for instance, in a squat, those mechanics you use there will help you to sprint, jump, decelerate, change direction. And so it's not actually what the squat looks like, it's the potential of the body to be able to perform that under load will then help you to be able to do the demonstration of the other skills that might be closer and more specific to your sport. The same is with a lunge. You know, that's that deceleration, eccentric force. And I don't want to get too technical in the language, but those are the forces that the body will happen when you're trying to play a shot directly underneath the net, for instance, where you see a lot of the top players on clay will slide in. Their strength training isn't those exercises. You don't have to do a lunge to get good at that shot. You need the potential of movement in the body and strength through the glutes and the quad and the calf and hamstring to be able to perform them proficiently. So it's the squat is a really important exercise, not because of the way it looks, because what it then lends to other areas of skill acquisition in different sports.
I think you hit it on the nail there, Tony, because there's a lot of research that if you do, you know, like if the argument was that the movement had to look like the sport, tennis players would all be having weights in the hand and swinging the weight. So that actually makes your technique worse because yes, much worse. So basic movement patterns to get stronger, and then you do the loaded stuff. Yeah, that's excellent that you mentioned that. Very good. And please send your questions through, guys, if you have any more. Yeah, excellent, Tony. So I think another thing I kind of just wanted to touch on is the role of, I guess, video analysis. So, especially with the lockdown, you guys can take videos of yourself doing an exercise and send it through to Tony. And we can take a look at, or Tony can take a look at your form. It's very easy to spot the mistakes on video. We don't have to be there. So, you can use this opportunity to gain some expertise here. So,
yeah, I think the video analysis side of stuff is, I really like it. And over this Zoom sort of workouts and side of stuff, that I've actually learned that I don't need to be there necessarily all the time. And the systems and the technology are really good. And you do get some of these applications where they can measure angles and all of that side of stuff. And they're really great. But I sort of trust my own coaching eye for a lot of stuff. And that can be with a video or in person and all of that other stuff. I think they're really good educational, but I also am very aware of getting paralysis with analysis, where we just try to use all of this technology to make it better, to be able to measure every force of every lift and everything else. And at some point we do have to just get down, get in the weeds and actually get workouts done. And if the technology is going to help us to streamline our approach, I think that's fantastic. But I am very aware of what I call the white noise of technology. Just because we can put a number onto it doesn't necessarily make us a better practitioner. I think technology can be done by the experts coming in that are going to take the data, maybe in a lab setting or a training session. I really feel that we need our coaches coaching, and I think that's the main ingredient. and backed up by the science. But I'm not a massive fan of like measuring every training session for GPS, because when you create all of that data, it's like, who's looking at it? How is that affecting the direction of what I'm training? If you want to know how fast an AFL runs over yards, you can search it on Google and you'll be able to pick that up. And if that becomes the basis of your training sessions, then I think you can actually save yourself a lot of hardship, rather than the hours and hours that I've seen coaches have to do on analyzing GPS data and all of that other stuff. And I think with video, the difference with that is that it can be a much shorter time capsule in terms of working with someone. Someone's not really getting the kinesthetic feeling. You show them a quick video and they go, yeah, that's brilliant. But we do know that not everybody will see what the coaches see when they look at a video. So there's many different styles for coaching, and I think we use them as tools rather than as we have to use these type of stuff.
I was just saying that, on the tennis court, I do see the side where the athletic ability of the person is better than the tennis player they are. And I think that's always a good starting point. But, you're an athlete before you get to the tennis ball. To get to the tennis ball, you have to be athletic. But when you're actually at the ball, you have to be a tennis player. So, the specific movements, the adjustment steps, the technical ability to slow down and not run into the ball, the judgment of distance and all this fun stuff. So, it's good to lockdown phase to practice, not only the athletic ability and the exercises, but to practice some of the specific movements of your sport as well, whether that be doing shadow swings or throwing a ball or catching a ball. I think that coordination factor needs to be there as well.
I think a really good point in that is the sort of stuff that came out of the NBA with some of the videos that had about Steph Curry, about just his being able to take more stimuluses in whilst doing basic skills. Like very rarely would he ever need to be dribbling two basketballs to play his sport, and then be able to do some of the cues that he's doing whilst he's doing that skill. But it's just about just trying to simplify the process of being able to control their body and stuff like that to enhance their skill that then comes to do another skill. And I think that sort of strive to think outside of the box. I think we sometimes get caught up in the, to make someone better, we just have to improve their weaknesses. And that's definitely not the right way necessarily to work. I know a conversation I had with Louis Kaya, who's a Canadian doubles tennis coach who helped out with Andy Murray back in the early days.
Yes, I know Louis, yes.
Yeah, great coach. In half an hour, he taught me how the different zones of a tennis court, going from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it ruined watching tennis for me, because I'm now just thinking, oh, they shouldn't have been playing that shot because they were in the wrong zone. And what he said was about Andy Murray is that he's got one of the best backhands in the world. And if he then started working too much on his weaknesses and his backhand started to not be timing as well as it is, he would go from a top 10 player in the world down to about 40 in the world, because the reason why he won a game was because his backhand was so good. If he tries to bring up his second serve and bring on his forehand at the detriment of practicing his backhand, he becomes a worse player. So I also think that that's another thing to make you better at what you do. It's not just analysing your weaknesses and then just putting all of your energy in there. And I think they talk about the 8-2 ratio, where 80% is what you do well and 20% is left there for improvements.
Fantastic. And, I'm a big Rafa fan, as you probably know, Tony, but Rafa, every time he's at a tournament, he's practicing his forehand every single time. He probably doesn't need to. He's got probably arguably the best forehand ever, but he constantly practices it because, you're only good as you can perform on that day. Everything you've done in the past, obviously mentally it affects your opponent, everything, but you need to go out there and perform every single day. So to practice your strengths, I think many of us don't really do that, do we, as often as we should?
Yeah. It's just having a good strategy and a plan of how to get better. And, you can experiment with these things, but the things that you're good at, if you can keep them performing at their highest potential for you, that will end up making you definitely a better athlete.
Yeah, and it's fun to practice your strengths, right? It's good stimulation, good motivation, and it's something that'll hopefully help your weaknesses. Excellent, Tony. I think we've talked about a lot of stuff. I have a few more kind of closing questions for you, if there's anything more you don't want to touch on. But
there's big shout out for Coach Ben, who's just come on. He's one of the guys that.
Oh, Coach Ben. Hi, Coach Ben.
Yeah, he was one of the guys who did some intern with it. His Instagram page has been fantastic. He's been really putting out some good. He's an example of someone who's in this isolation, has put out some great material for coaches. So big shout out to him. I'm really impressed. I'm actually reading a lot of his stuff. So
fantastic.
Big
Thanks,
shout
Ben.
out.
I'll definitely add you and share your Instagram page with all of our clients. It's excellent. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, if you guys have any more questions for Tony, throw some hard ones in there. Go for it. But otherwise, Tony, so let's think about 3 lessons that you have learned from your years of experience as a coach. If you could summarize them in just 3 words.
Yeah. So individuality. So that comes down to programming. It's all about individualized programs. I don't write any big global, like there's not an AFL program to follow. It's about athlete. It's about making it specific to them. Relationships. I think that's coaching. If you want to get good and you want to get into the high elite level, you have to bring you, the person, into the relationship. You also have to want to build the relationship with the athlete to get the best out of them, which means there's a lot of time spent in that environment of getting to know the other person, and that might be going for a coffee, that might be, you know, making phone calls at weekends and stuff, and just being interested in other people. That's one of the really, if you're going to be a successful coach, you've got to be a people's person. And I suppose my third one, which is something that I'm not accused of, I actually really appreciate. I really appreciate people say this about me, but it's my passion. Passion is, if you're not passionate, then this isn't the job for you. It's hard. There's long hours. If I looked back to some of the hours I work as a personal trainer, it's like some of the longest days you've ever had. But I think with the passion side of stuff is the passion to get better, the passion to everything that you do, the passion to make the other person and communicate and educate the best. I see an awful lot of coaches that land in an internship with S&C and they don't have that passion. So you asked me earlier on about what do I look for in a coach. If I was employing someone underneath me, I would be looking for that show me passion. And the second thing, which I think is a good thing of management, is try and employ someone who's better than you, or someone that you think is better than you, because I can then learn from them. As a manager, don't be fearful of employing the employee as a real strong skill set, even if it threatens your ability, because by being around that person, you'll learn from them. Your business will be more successful because you've got good people. And if you have someone who has ambitions to leave after a year, don't be scared of that. Just enjoy the benefit of having them for a year. So yeah, definitely. There's some of the things that I really value.
Excellent, Tony. That's I really like that last one. I think that's important for coaches to hear. Like, don't be threatened to, you know, work together. We can all learn from each other, and you know, if you learn something every day, you're doing a good job, I think. So, Coach Ben's got one for you, Tony. Yeah. If you have time, have you noticed any notable differences between S&C in Australia compared to the UK? Great question.
Yeah, I think from a qualification point of view, there is differences. I feel that the qualification in the UK, in the exam, you basically have to sit an exam, do a plyometric workout, demonstrate your Olympic lifting, and then write a program that has to be done over 3 to 6 months and present it to a panel. I think that's a real hard examination of you as an S&C coach. And to pass each level of that, you have to show competence. So I think that as a qualification basis, I think is really something that when I look across the world, I think the NSCA strength conditioning is a online exam, look at the computer, and then with the Australian qualification, they will fill out a workbook. But I think the time that it takes for the UK SEA is probably double the amount of time that you do for the qualification in Australia. What does that mean? Not a lot. You're only as good as the practitioner that you do on every day. But I think athletes in Australia work really hard. I'm not saying they don't in the UK, but I think there's an unhealthy relationship with just working hard as a coach. So I think in Australia, I think I've had to do a lot more on planning recovery with athletes, which was a bit of a shock. So there are some gaps, I think, in knowledge with recovery in Australia that I think it's down to the responsibility of the S&C coach to be able to do that. And it's a hard one because there's often a bit of bite back to it. They sort of go, well, you know, why do I need to do less? And less is more. And the more we learn that, the better we're going to become. But I think there's great coaches in Australia. There's great coaches in England. There's great coaches everywhere. And that's the thing is that the strength of strength conditioning in Australia is to get to one of those mentors, to get to one of those examples. The change in media in terms of Instagram pages and people that are doing good stuff now makes the job a little bit easier, but also can create complacency in that you should have a mentor. You should still touch in and communicate with someone that is interested in investing in you. And I've got 2 mentors here in Australia that I still go to and I still have conversations with, and they're the people that keep me honest. So I think there's with the strength side of stuff, I think Australia has less jobs at the moment than what they do in the UK, but I think that's changing. And I also think in Australia and the UK is that there's a lot of voluntary positions in Australia, which sort of holds back the industry a little bit in comparison to the UK. But if ever you get an opportunity to coach internationally or to go to different conferences, a lot of the younger generation are much better at outreaching through Instagram and all that sort of stuff. Is get in contact with these coaches, because when I get someone who asks me a question like the one I'm doing now, I want to answer it and I want to give them the best. And I think that's the sort of real pureness of our industry, is that we are actually quite giving. We like to give back to try and help the next generation.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? Because we don't want that gap between coaches and knowledge kind of bypassed. You know, it's a great question, Ben. And I think now with social media, like, you can connect all around the world pretty easily. Yeah. So, you know, I think everyone's hopefully starting to come sort of on the same page. And, you know, in tennis, each country teaches differently, but the fundamentals are the same. You know, I think that depends on the court surface. You know, in the US, they play a lot on hard court, in European clay, in Australia, a mixture of everything. So you kind of see that sort of player form around the world, the baseliner versus the all court player. But eventually, you know, you got to travel all around the world if you want to be good. So you have to be good at a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great question, guys. If you have any more questions, send them through. But all right, Tony. Little pivot step here. So what's your biggest pet peeve as a coach? Something that really doesn't sit well with you?
Again, this is like, again, I've over the last few years tried to get calmer with a lot of stuff and not get bent out of shape by the success of other people and what other people are doing and recognition. I think you have to stay within your lane. I think you have to realize what you are. I'm not a young coach anymore. So moving into that mentor role, I think a pet peeve sometimes is that that you don't get recognition sometimes for the work that you do. And I think everyone sort of, there's a lot more people that are better at media than me, that are better at business stuff. I would just love to see the industry recognize the value of work right across the board. And you're not the best coach just because you're working with an elite club and stuff. I think it's more of a personal pet peeve in terms of that you want to get recognition for what you do, but it's not judged by. There's always this thing about who you've worked with or what that's totally irrelevant. The best work I've ever done is an athlete you'll never know the name of, but it's the proudest amount of work that I've ever done. And I'm not going to drop the person's name because that's unfair, but it's the best work I've done and the changes I helped that athlete do within their body for them to become the best version of themselves. Their best version of themselves wasn't on the world stage, but the best version of themselves is that I really took that athlete from one place to another, and we did it together. And I think that's the thing. Athlete coaches that take recognition for athletes' effort, that is definitely my pet peeve. I've just landed on it. That's the one thing. Athletes need to be given the spotlight when the time comes. The coaches need to drift into the background.
Absolutely, that's perfect way you put it. I think that's quite the evidence in tennis as well. You know, it is about the athlete. The coaches, it's just a small percentage of the athlete. We're here to guide you. We're here to motivate you, put you on the right path, but then the rest is up to you, right? Yeah.
I also think with young coaches as well, they sometimes don't want to get in the way. They don't want to sort of feel like they put a coach out. I did a session recently, probably about a year and a half ago, with Justin Rioli, who's trains Australia's fastest 800-meter runner, and he gives all his information away. He's a fantastic coach. He's out there, and he would quite willingly have a coach come alongside him and learn from him and stuff. But people aren't taking up those opportunities. So a pet peeve sometimes is that we talk about there's no jobs in S&C, there's no, you know, opportunities and stuff. There are lots of opportunities. You've just got to be bold enough to put your messages out there and learn from some of these great coaches that you have in Australia. And it might not even be a strength conditioning coach. It might be a running coach. It might be an AFL coach. And just get out. If you have the passion, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be communicating with these people and ask for opportunities. And you might get a knockback because it's not convenient for that coach at the time. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't then re-ask them again and again and again and again, and eventually you will get that opportunity.
Eventually you will. Yeah. Fantastic, Tony. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing to talk to you again and see you on camera during this lockdown, and thanks for sharing all your knowledge with myself and all the viewers. It's been excellent.
Do it again.
Very good. We'll do it again. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll speak to you soon.